welcome to GovCon Unfiltered, where your journey through the labyrinth of federal contracting begins. I'm Alexa Tsui, your guide and host on this epic adventure. Here, we dive deep into the heart of government contracting, shedding light on the heroic tales of those who navigate its complex terrain. Our mission? To bring you closer to the action, revealing the critical steps, triumphant victories, and occasional pitfalls that our intrepid adventurers face. Your journey into the world of government contracting starts now, and we could not be happier to have you with us. Let's embark on this adventure together. Thank you for joining us on GovCon Unfiltered. Today, our guest is Sonny Kakar. So excited to talk with him today. He's got so much to share. Sonny, please, first, before we get started, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Alexa. Thanks for having me on. My name is Sonny Kakar. I am the executive director of SevaTruck. It's a food truck that we serve Title I schools in the DMV, and also the CEO of SevaSpaces, which is a co-working space dedicated to the GovCon community. I'm a former CEO of a company called Sevatec that was a national security technology firm that we sold to private equity and then IBM a few years ago.
Awesome. Perfect. I think a lot of the folks listening to this will probably already know who you are, but if for anybody else that is just tuning in for the first time, you're in for a real treat. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question. So as I kind of mentioned, I think many people will know you for everything that you've done and everything that you've done to give back to the community. But what's a pivotal time for your early career that really shaped who you are today? Maybe something that's not in your official bio.
Boy, I'm an open book, but I think I can probably think of a couple things. When I graduated college, this was for immigrant, and I think that many of your viewers probably are immigrants and have a similar story of parents coming here, kind of giving up a lot of what they had where they were, wherever they came from, to build a life here in America. And so we did all of that. I came when I was 5 years old. My parents struggled and sacrificed a lot. And I went through college. I did my mechanical engineering degree at the University of Maryland. And then I went back to India. And my parents were so distraught. I remember them like, "We left India for you to come here. Why are you going back?" And actually, it was interesting because I went back, one to connect with India to the best that I also, it was for a direct sales company that I was going to be working for. I was literally walking around businesses in India selling all kinds of different items. And it was probably the most difficult time in my life because I'd just gotten this degree and I thought I was making a great decision, but it was a real character builder. And what it did was, I think all these things, I think most entrepreneurs have cut grass and have had landscaping businesses. And I think most of them have done paper routes, and I've done all of that stuff. For 3 years, I did this paper route, Washington Post, every day, 7 days a week, waking up at 4:00. And with all of those experiences, I realized, boy, I better really do something with my life. Otherwise, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. And I think India was no different. India was one of those experiences that really kickstart my career in doing something bigger and more creative. And because of that struggle, I think it just made me stronger.
Mhm. I think going to India after you got your degree, and that's such a great story, but what was something positive from that? Like, did you meet some people that you hadn't known before and like develop lifelong friendships with them? Or did you take back any like really strong, I guess you did take back a strong work ethic. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, yes. So for your first part of the question, I reconnected with some of my family that still lives there.
Right. Awesome.
And connected with my faith that originated there. And the work, we were working 6 days a week, 16-hour days. So it was definitely and it was field work, and it was sales. So I learned sales, which I didn't learn in school.
Of course
So
not. Yeah.
really developing the art of sales, of relationship building, of creating kind of a fear of loss, but also, value add. And so for an entire year, I did this, and I think I really did develop some skills that then I brought back into, and I didn't know I was going to be in the GovCon space necessarily at that time. I knew nothing about it, but I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew that sales, building relationships, being a problem solver, and having great work ethic were going to be the foundation for whatever was to come in the future.
I think those things you just mentioned are some of the most important things for government contractors. And I think starting one from scratch and building it and growing it and selling it and having that story is so impactful for just the entire industry to see. It kind of puts hope in the sails for a lot of the struggling small businesses, especially in this day and age. So I did have a question that was a little bit off script. In 2025 has been a little bit of a hard year for all of industry. I think we all know that. So what would you say as like advice to these small businesses? Maybe they're in an 8A program or other set aside programs that have been impacted. What kind of advice would you give them to do things differently to succeed?
That's a great question. And it's hard sitting in my chair now giving advice on something when people are living it today. All I can really share is what is being experienced today, the level of uncertainty. It's temporary
Mm,
because throughout, whether it was when I was running the business or whether it was before that in the GovCon space or outside the GovCon space, there are going to be some challenges that we have no control over. It's
right.
kind of what our entrepreneurialism is all about.
Right.
Because if it was easy, if there were no obstacles, then we'd all be doing it. We all know that. But it's because of the difficulty that you are in the position that you're in today, which is to overcome that challenge. That's why you're the leader as of your business. And so you've got to think about these things as temporary, and they almost always are. We've already
Right.
seen change, right? We saw some changes in March. They were abrupt. They shook us up a little bit, and I've talked to a lot of people about that. But staying the course, I mean, you still have to be thoughtful. If the puck has moved, and we know what
Hmm.
that analogy means, if that puck has moved and you've been focused on a certain capability or a certain trajectory within the federal government, and that the money puck has moved somewhere else, well, there's going to have to be a pivot. But
Right.
I do not recommend recoiling
Right.
because those that really continue to be thoughtful, deliberate, get their team excited about investment, knowing that whatever difficulty there is, everybody's going through it, and you got to push yourself through it and be the leader that you need to be, and have your team be the leaders they need to be to move your company forward. So my recommendation really is think about all of these things that happen in business as temporary and
Mhm.
an opportunity to learn. And those companies that really stick to their guns, stick to their values, stick to their work, to what their business is all about, build stronger. And this is the time to really build even stronger relationships with your team,
Yeah.
right? To overcome this challenge because it's as much mental as it might be financial or, related to your business, but you got to help them push through it. So that's kind of my 2 cents on how you deal with some of the current uncertainties that are facing the GovCon sector.
Oh, perfect. Well, I do appreciate that. I think a lot of folks are looking to get into commercial or pivoting to SLED, but you're right, like, staying the course and being really dedicated is probably a very wise course of action. I
Yeah,
always
and
say yeah,
it's
yeah,
still the biggest customer in the world.
right,
I
right,
mean,
and
look at the budgets are not decreasing. They may be
right,
shifting, but they're not decreasing. So that's a very lucrative and an extremely mission focused opportunity to work with the federal government. And so you do need to align your passion with emissions. I think that's important as well, so that you're not doing things that you're not
right.
necessarily aligned with.
Yeah, you need to have your why. Your why is going to fuel your how
Exactly.
every single time.
Yeah.
Alright, so next question is I love this question because I'm a career BD capture person. Executive. So, what's a common misconception people have about making money in the consulting space? I know that, I always see these funny memes about what people think contractors do and what they actually do. So, I'm really excited to hear your take on this one.
Yeah, I guess this one it depends on what the perspective, who's asking the question or who's thinking about it. If you are a business owner, when I started the business, I thought, oh boy, as soon as I get my 8A, contracts are just gonna fall. I won't know how many I can catch. There'll just be so many. And, what a misconception that business just falls in your lap. It never happens. I mean, if it ever happens, it is a godsend. It's a blessing that, that happens to very few people. So for the most part, one of the misconceptions is once I get my 8A or some certification or even a vehicle, all of a sudden
Right.
business is going to be healed. It's going to be amazing. It's just going to grow through the roof. The reality is those are just table stakes, and it continues to evolve because competition is so fierce, and it needs to be fierce because we're trying to really solve some of the biggest challenges
Right.
facing the nation. And so that's where I think people really need to focus on those table stakes. Those are the barriers to entry into the federal government.
Right.
Then you got to compete. Those vehicles are really going to be, they're helpful, but they will not bring in business. So I think that's one misconception. Another is that somehow that the federal government is not going to hold us accountable the same way that potentially a commercial enterprise might. And so we feel we can somehow sometimes hide under a layer within the government. That's why you see so many federal agencies in many cases, they haven't really progressed very much. They're
Right.
still using technology that commercial has abandoned a decade ago.
Right.
And so it is incumbent upon us the misconception about money is only a byproduct of bringing great value.
Right.
Being sustained, your business is going to be sustainable because you've added value, and that value has got to be measurable beyond meeting a milestone in a project management, a Gantt chart or some sort of a project management plan. It's got to be, to the taxpayer. It's got to be, and I
Right.
think if all those fundamentals work out,
Right.
then I think that remuneration will eventually come to your business.
Right.
The last thing I'll point out, and I've heard this being said by many people, and I understand it because it's a very difficult business. It can be lonely as an entrepreneur. It's challenging. But I hear people saying, I want to sell the business in 3 years or 5 years. And it's interesting because when I ask why, or when I ask, is that the goal, just to sell it? Or then you start digging in a little bit more. And really where I think, and that's not to me, the wrong message to send to your team or the industry, because it shows that you're transient and
Right.
that you are looking for a payday versus building a great company. And
Right.
I will just, you know, I will just say, and I would advise, focus on building a great company. And that starts with your management team, your people, the culture that you build, and the technology you invest in, or if it's technology or service or product
Right.
that you invest in, and make it the best you can possibly make it. And if you do that and you invest wisely, the money aspects will then follow. But if you
Yeah.
lead with, I want to sell, I want to make a lot of money, you
Right.
forget about the stuff that really people value. What other
Right.
companies, private equity, other buyers, the customers, employees, what they value
Right.
is the quality of what you built, the decisions when times get rough,
Mm-hmm.
the passion, the empathy, the innovation, the creativity, all those kinds of things that make companies go from, kind of the run of the mill to something really great that it stands out.
Yeah, this is the good line of thinking. And I think that there's a lot of thoughts about making a lot of money by selling your IT company in GovCon. This is like a whole talk track that people have. And I think your points are really valid. I do want to talk about competition just for a second, because I think that there are a lot of companies out there that are up and coming out of Silicon Valley and commercial hitting the GovCon space right now, especially vibe coding and using AI to bring, solutions to bear much faster than a traditional GovCon. And things are going to get a lot harder for traditional government contractors, especially the smaller companies. When it
Yeah.
comes to the competitive BD strategies, growth strategies, what were your opinions on that one?
Yeah. So I think that as these commercial companies have come in, they have introduced some very creative ways that are more efficient. Some of the hurdles that we have in the federal government is the policy, the barriers to the innovation, whether that's, I mean, you need things like FedRAMP, you need the security credentials to be able to introduce new solutions into the federal government. Having said that, I think it's an area that the federal government needs to invest in a lot so that the ease of bringing in new technologies is a little bit more streamlined. A, a contractor standpoint, you have to innovate. We cannot be what we're classifying as a traditional government contractor. And traditional, by what I mean by traditional, is a butts and seats mentality.
Right.
That is not a sustainable model. And Those that have continued with that model have typically, not continued to maybe grow or
Right.
provide value at the level that they were hoping for. So my guidance on business development is you got to narrow the capability, got to narrow the focus. What's a misconception, I think, also in small businesses, we thinking as entrepreneurs, we can do everything.
Yeah.
And when I was starting, and it's actually, I learned that over 25
Right.
years. When I started the business, we had 25 customers. We were in every single cabinet level agency. When I sold the business, we were in 3.
Right.
When I started, my website was filled with every buzzword related to technology.
Right.
When we sold, we had 1.
Right.
And so the point is when you're looking at BD strategy, you gotta be innovative. It's gotta be relevant today. We know that I don't need to say buzzwords like AI, but they need to be applicable to a business challenge, not AI for the sake of AI and not technology for the sake of technology. It's gotta be focused on solving a real business problem that keeps your customers awake at night. I mean, very
Right.
specific.
Right.
And I think if you do that and you narrow your focus, what happens is a few things. One is the people that you hire are all now concentrated on that one capability and
Right.
one mission set. And the amount of I used to always say, the 5 best team members can go up against Leidos's 5 best team members anytime.
Oh
It
yeah.
was because we were as a company, we were a 500 person company, laser focused on one capability in 1 or
Right.
2 customers.
Right.
I don't think a Leidos would have, or another large company, I didn't need to pick the company, very capable in so many areas, but
Right.
will they have 500 people channeled into this one? And that's the difference in terms of just business development strategy is
Right.
narrow your focus because the competition is fierce. You gotta have more pounds per square inch focused
Right.
on a specific agency that's all data driven as well. I mean, you can't be in the wrong agency given
Right.
where the government is leaning and where their priorities are.
So did you meet with your leadership team year over year, or did you set like strategic goals for like a 3-year period and work backwards? Because I've seen it work both ways, but this is a common thing for small businesses to want to do everything. And then the better they get at their jobs, they kind of narrow and focus. This is really good advice. And I hope every small business out there listens to this. But I wanna know from a strategy perspective, because that's what you had to do to come up with these, right? It's not like you just out of the whim, everybody decided, "Oh, let's focus on these 2 things in one agency and let's go." No, you had to actually bring the team together, think about what mattered, think about what worked, think about what you have, and then push it forward from there. So how did you do your strategy sessions?
Yeah, in some ways very traditional to what every company does. The normal business cycle in September, you start planning for the following year. You have an offsite, you build a budget and a financial model for the following year, you put projections in. And in the beginning, I found those to be very useless.
Right,
We're finding that we're always missing the mark on the goals, and they're
right.
mostly financial goals. And and so as time went on, and the horizon of what we were planning for was too long. And in today's market, I'd say you never want to look at beyond 2 years because it's just, I mean,
Right,
seriously, you don't want to go much longer than 2 years. It's just things change too much. So you're
right,
putting a lot of energy into something that you're absolute that I could almost guarantee is going to change.
right.
Uh, the way we did it is that first it was very data driven. So we try to
Mhm.
take the emotions all out of it. Like our strategy had to be data driven as well. It's not
Right,
it because it had to be supported by, are there opportunities? Are we in the right cycle? Like the last thing you want to do is go into an agency and say, that's where we're going to go. And they just went through all their procurement cycles for the next 5 years, or 90% of their stuff just got awarded.
or they just put it all they have a vehicle that they purchase off of that you don't have. Like,
Yeah, or you don't have, yeah.
you gotta know this stuff.
Or they had a agency level BPA or an IDIQ that they've already awarded. Right. So if you don't go in with that level of visibility, then you really are just shooting, darts with blindfolds on.
Right,
So I think we would start with, let's figure out where we want to be.
Right.
Let's answer these very important, critical questions of whether there is really an opportunity there. What's the competitive landscape? What's the
Right.
distance that we've got to cover in order to close the gap between us who are unknowns, especially if it's greenfield?
Right.
And we would only do maximum one greenfield a year because it's just too expensive. We'd rather
Yeah.
go adjacent within the same agency, which tends to
Mm-hmm.
work a lot better, and which is where your priorities should be
Right.
before you go into a brand new greenfield.
Right.
And then so base that on actual procurements and then come up with a real plan around that. What we did was we actually used Jira. It was a Jira board that we had a weekly meeting because we wanted to have resources of like, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Who's responsible for it? What are the dates? And so that went down throughout the entire organization. And those goals were in front of us every single week. We would try to make are we spending our time in the right places or not? This is what we said we're going to do. Are we really
Right.
doing it? And so I think actionable plans
Right.
are absolutely critical to ensure that your strategic plan doesn't become shelfware and collects dust. So you got
Yeah.
to figure out a way on a very regular weekly basis to be looking at what were we trying to accomplish for the year and are we actually moving closer and is a team aligned to it?
Interesting. I love the Jira board idea, and that's a very technology forward way of doing it, especially when you have a bunch of leaders that understand how it works and the point of it and all that. So, all right, let's move into our next question. When you think about your network, this is my favorite question. What has been the most effective approach, not just for building connections, but to turn them into beneficial relationships?
We've heard the words competimates and
Yeah.
there's probably a bunch of others that I've now probably forgotten, but frenemies or whatever the hell. But it's interesting because I think that in an environment like today, you need to have an extremely strong network and relationships primarily because, post COVID, those have become a little bit more difficult, especially for the smaller businesses that got started either right before COVID or in the last few years. Creating connectivity
Right.
with other people has been a challenge, and creating deep enough of a relationship where trust is built is certainly a challenge. And so, while it's a challenge, it can be overcome, and that just takes persistence.
Right.
And so, the way I've always looked at my network is it's got to be a give and take, and it's like any other relationship, whether it's with your spouse or your partner or your family or your kids or whoever. I think every relationship takes a give and take, and it takes a real genuine interest and wanting to see a mutual benefit. And it's no different in business because you're not going to
Right.
build a sustainable relationship if it's not a win-win. And that means that you got to look at what you're great at, and more importantly, look at what you're not great at.
Hmm.
Because it's really hard for people, and me included, to think that we're not good at something. And what you find is when you go and start bidding and say, "Oh, you know what? I just bid on this, and we thought we could do it all," and you come back and you get a tech score that perhaps wasn't as strong in a certain area, and you start realizing over kind of in a very difficult way that you're not the best at everything. And so that's why then I think the network's very important. I think building companies that complement your skill set, strengthen your skill set, both in terms of past performance, reach, relationships. I don't say outsource relationships. That you
Ah,
cannot do.
you cannot
I
do
don't
that.
say you do that, but what I'm saying is that it should be complementary so that you can have go-to partners that you trust, that you can build together. And to think in today's environment, the Lone Ranger concept may be a little bit more difficult now than it was perhaps a decade or two ago. But yeah, I think getting out there, working with organizations like G2X, going to these various events, connecting with customers,
Right.
you gotta have some value to add, so you gotta be thinking about not
Yep.
necessarily some sort of a scripted pitch, but a
Right.
really genuine way of, "This is what my business can offer, and I can add value." And the more sincere and the more capable and the more you got to back that up, I think that network will stay with you through the evolution of your business.
Right. I feel like the best word that you said was genuine because people feel like in order to be professional and likable, they have to be a certain way. But the more authentic and genuine you are, the more people like you. And it's because then they're like, they know they can see the real you, and it allows them to be the real them. And then that connection is warmer and stronger earlier, rather than trying to have to, go through the sticky wickets of teaming and sub Ks and, delivery. And it's better to build those warm relationships up front before you get through the gauntlet of working together, right?
Yeah, because the what you're describing is the dating phase. And and the dating phase is always fun, and until, the rubber hits the road, which is
And this is why I could never date, is because I was doing BD and capture for too long. Because dating was terrible and too much like it.
I know, it's like once you get to the teaming agreement stage and the sub-K stage is when or the contract stage is when things get a little sticky. But yeah, and that's why it's so and listen, there's gonna be in it and I've had situations where I thought we had great partners, and at the end, they turned out not to be, it did not work out. And I've had to go the other way that, we tried a few things and we thought we were doing it for the right, and it did work out. So just like everything else in business, some are going to work out and some are not. But I think you've got to be authentic and genuine in your purpose about building a relationship. And it's got to be value add going both ways, and both have got to benefit long
Right.
to ensure that is sustainable. And that includes whether you're partnering or whether you're, hiring leadership or anybody within
Right.
your company, and even with the customers. I mean, it applies everywhere in our lives as human beings, and it certainly is no different in our business.
Right. That makes sense. What's a risk that you took that seemed crazy at the time, but fundamentally changed your trajectory? How did you actually build the confidence to take that leap?
Oh boy, this one is, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs that I've talked to go through this stage, and that is you feel like you can't do it anymore. And it's interesting. It's psychological. And I used to tell, my team, tell me how I'm doing because there's a job I'm doing today I've never done before. And that's what happens in entrepreneurship. I mean, in most cases,
Right.
but if you're a lifelong entrepreneur and you were not running a company or you were not building a business and you just kind of jumped into this, you're literally doing a job you've never done before every day. It's kind of like being a parent. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
we've not done it before. We're just kind of doing the best we can as we go along. And a time came, business was doing well, but I decided to leave the business. It was in 2016. So I stepped down as CEO and I brought in a CEO. And the impetus for that primarily, some of it may have been just, am I the right person to lead the company to the next level or
Right.
not? And the other part was that's when I started SevaTruck.
Oh,
So in 2016, I took the year off and bought a FedEx truck and just built out a kitchen, knew nothing about our restaurants or serving, food. But I'm like, this is something I'm not going to wait to some point in the future to do if I can do it today. And so the
right.
timing was right. I just come back from a trip to India and I realized that, there was a purpose for me to be one of the few lucky people to have the opportunity to come to America, and there's got to be more expected of me than just kind of building a business. So I felt like service has always been a big part of my family, my upbringing, my faith, my community, and so decided to do that. And I thought it was crazy. I think everyone told me you're crazy. You're not going to run your business. And so I literally the first day when I left, I hired a CEO. I went and bought a tractor,
Yeah.
and I just started digging with an auger and just moving dirt around. I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was interesting that it was such a crazy move.
Right.
And but 1 year later, for reasons I won't get into, this didn't work out with the CEO, but I came back in
Mm.
2016 and some amazing things happened. Number one, we got this amazing nonprofit organization started and we're making a real impact in our community that we live in. And to me, that was extremely rewarding, still is today, 9 years later. The second thing that happened is that when I returned to the business, I I came into the business as a brand new CEO. And what I
Right.
mean by that is I no longer knew what was happening. I
Hmm.
did it as if I was a hired gun.
Right.
And so I think had I been there the entire time, I don't know if I would have looked as critical in every aspect of the business. And I'm like, okay, we have got to now really change the trajectory of our business.
Right.
I'm seeing now, like stepping away, it was amazing. Stepping away from it for a year
Yeah.
showed all the skeletons in the closet,
Right.
the things like, what is happening here? This is not as pretty as I thought it was. This baby is ugly. And I had to change, make some very hard decisions, change some leadership, introduced and brought in new leadership, advisors, investment strategy totally changed. And between 2016 and 2019, we totally transformed the business.
Wow.
And I don't think I would have been able to do that. And so this is one of those, like, you're crazy to do it. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I've always felt that if you do things with purpose, you do things that are, very loving, kind of with positive uh, thoughts and very sincere, I think that there is a way that, life kind of just works its way out in your favor. And that was one of those things that amazing people were introduced, rejuvenated people that were within the business, repositioned them in places where they could be more effective, absolutely changed our investment strategy, and we just took off. The business took off. I mean,
Nice.
we converted all of our small business to unrestricted. It was 100% technology, software development,
Right.
desktops, AI, and very concentrated in a couple of customer sets. And then we had this amazing transaction that I'm grateful for.
The funny thing is, I remember this. I remember watching from the outside and thinking, wow, he left the business and came back. I want to know the backstory. And now I know the backstory. So thank you for sharing. Last question. If you were to go back and give yourself some advice when you were just starting out, what would you say about balancing competition and collaboration?
Yeah, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I think competition and collaboration. I think as entrepreneurs, we are wired to think that we should just be competing.
Right.
And it was what I'd said a little bit earlier that, we think we can do it all, whether that's in every agency, every capability. I still see websites and marketing pitches from, relatively small businesses profess that they can do everything.
Right.
And I think what happens is my reaction, at least, and I know other people's reaction very quickly becomes the rolling of the eyes, right? It's not credible. And so it's got to be backed up with very specific capabilities, past performance, and innovations that you've actually, prototypes, whatever that happens to be.
Mm.
And so I think just coming to finding those few companies that you really can collaborate with, but only do that once you've figured out what your strategy is.
Right.
The strategy still has to be narrow. Like, what do
Right.
you do better than what's the best thing that your company does? And do you feel that you can do that better than anybody else? And where can you apply that technology or that solution or that service to a business challenge
Right.
in a market that matters today? And if you can do that, then you want to build your ecosystem around that. And so I think we have to have a healthy balance of competition and collaboration because the government expects it. It's actually lower risk and it's better value for the business that you currently run, but it's also better value for your customer sets. And if you want to be competitive, your competitors also are collaborative.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think we're moving into an environment of more collaboration. It's not that it
Yep.
hasn't been there. I just think it's going to be there even more going forward because of how competitive things are and you can't be the best at everything.
Right, right. I've been giving a talk lately about 3 pivots that government contractors need to do right now. And one of the first things I say is you should fire up your subcontracting. You should build teams with successful larges and really get that path to revenue strong rather than trying to prime everything. I mean, go ahead and keep doing that, but make sure you have the subcontractor piece strong as well because these procurements are going to be shifting around more than usual. Instead of going service disabled veteran owned, they're going to go full and open. The government's going to stop sending things to the small business tracks. Once they hit their goals, they're done. So you need to start developing the relationships with the larger businesses and have a whole stack of them that you know, like, and trust in your capabilities. So what you're saying is really resonating with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because of the more very current, recent, changes that are in the environment. And so just to piggyback off of what you said, in order to be attractive to a large business in terms of a sub K, you've got to come there with a minimum of two things. And one is a very unique capability, and it can't just be we do AI or we do
Right.
software. I mean, very specific. It's, we're platinum partners with Salesforce, or we are very, it's got to be something that's very value add. The second thing is you got to have relationships with the customer.
Right.
No, I think going to a large company and then saying, "Can you connect me?" and going through their small business channels and saying, "We just want to be a subcontractor,"
Yeah.
without saying, "I want to be in this program within this agency, within this department."
Right.
Oh, it's who do they connect you with?
Right.
And the reason I want to be there is because I've worked there for a long time. I know the program manager. I know where their spend is focused on. I know the deals that are coming out. I know that the current
Right.
company is vulnerable. Like, what do you know that a
Right.
large is going to say, "Wow, I want you," versus the other 100 companies that have submitted?
Right. Right.
Well,
Right. Yeah. I think it's access and influence most of the time. Those are the
yeah,
two things that they want.
yeah, and I think so. If it's in a new, like, if you are in an agency where you already have some domain expertise, relationships, by all means, prime. Everything you
Right.
can prime, you need to prime. You got to keep priming. Those agencies where either the deal's going, it's going to go unrestricted because it's too large, or it's in an agency that you're not in right now, but you have customer relationships, then sub K is the way to go. That's the way you get your foot
Yeah.
in the door. But in order to get your foot in the door, you got to differentiate yourself amongst all the other small businesses, and you got to be
Right.
thinking about that and be very honest with yourself. Are you differentiating yourself or not? Otherwise, you can't be disappointed with not getting a response back from those large firms.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much for today, Sunny. It's been a
Oh,
pleasure
my
talking
pleasure.
to you.
No, it's fantastic. Thanks, Alexa, for having me. I enjoyed it, and good luck to your organization. And you guys are doing
Thank
great
you.
work.
Thank you.